I have to give you a warning. This next conversation that you're about to hear with Dominic was probably one of the hardest conversations, but the most inspiring conversations I've ever had. Growing up, I was a big fan of watching him on a hit TV show. And it brought me so much joy and it brought me so much inspiration as a kid. But a lot of the times we don't see the stories behind the curtain of what somebody goes through throughout seeing them on social media and on television. We don't see the dark sides of the battles that somebody goes through. A conversation that had a lot of difficult questions to ask, but a story so beautiful to share. Enjoy.
Award-winning actor, writer, producer, filmmaker, straight from the Boogie Down Bronx.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Dominic Colon. I am Dominic Colon.
Manny Spamboni.
Writer, producer Dominic Colon has been a whirlwind. Not only did he take Crush, a story that addresses the issue of homophobia, gay rights, and equality with humor and style, and then transform it from a play into a short film, he was also the winner of the 2011 HBO Latino Short Film Script Competition.
There was an interview where you spoke that 2011 was a very interesting year for you.
At the time when I was diagnosed as HIV positive, it felt like, just like a huge smack in the face. In 2008, I ended up getting cast on the reboot of The Electric Company, which I know you're a fan of. And that was a great time in my life, but it was one of those things where like this amazing thing was happening, but I had this other thing happening underneath that I really couldn't talk about, that I felt like, I wasn't in therapy. I wasn't taking care of myself. For a long time, that's how I lived. And in 2011, I had a moment in my life where I had a suicidal thought. I didn't, try to commit suicide. It wasn't an active thing. But I know for me, having the thought was enough. I told my mom for the first time, and that was a big step in my healing. Yeah, that was 2011, and I always say that was the beginning of my journey.
Being HIV positive, having suicidal thoughts, the mental issues that were going on, throughout all of that, you were doing all these things that a lot of people didn't know that you were going through.
You never really know what someone's going through. I mean, I was acting, for, a period of that time, during that time from 2008 to 2010 or 11, we were shooting, The Electric Company, and, it was a kid's show, and I had to put on a face, and I was putting on a face at home, and there's only so much acting that you can do. You can do it in your professional life, but if you're doing it at home, or, constantly, it affects you. And even if I felt like I couldn't be myself in life, I could be myself on stage. So I did my best to, make myself like invisible or as visible as I possibly could. And it made me sad. When you ask me how am I, considering everything that is going on,
So Dominic, I have two questions for you to start off, and one of them is very casually used, and it's something that when you ever meet somebody, you always say this first question, but I want you to give your honest answer to this question. And the question is so simple: is how are you doing right now, and how do you feel right now?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's an honor. I believe in the power of sharing story and building community. And, this is an opportunity, to connect, to tell my story. And I'm really grateful for that. So thank you for having me on the podcast. How am I? I am good, all things considered. I am a member of the WGA and SAG. I've had the opportunity to work as an actor professionally for the past 20 years, and, now as a writer for the past 3. For those of you who don't know, we are very much in the midst of a strike. For the WJ, it's been almost 4 months, and for SAG, it's been a month. And I'm very active in the strike. I'm a WJ strike captain, and I am the co-chair of the WJ Latine coalition on the East Coast. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of energy, to unify, to educate on just what exactly we are fighting for in this industry, to make it more equitable and to make it more fair, considering how much these corporations are, making off the back of so many creators. So when you ask me how am I, considering everything that is going on, I'm doing very well. I have a roof over my head. I have food to eat. I have, beautiful people in my life. So I'm very grateful and I'm very thankful. Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting topics that I really, really want to talk about. And I've been watching a lot of the interviews you sent over to me, a lot of the stories about you. And so there's a lot of interesting history on there and a lot of the backstory that a lot of people don't usually see when they are watching, people on television or they're seeing people on social media. They really don't get to see the actual person behind all that. And so this next follow-up to that question was, if you can give me some backstory of starting when you were younger, starting from you were younger to where you're at now, paint that picture for me of your life, of how you progressed.
Well, many, many years ago, because I'm older than I look, I think. I grew up in the Bronx, born, raised, in the Castleville section. I was a very, kind of outsider-y kid. I never felt quite accepted. Growing up, I was, short, fat, flamboyant, all the things that could garner, especially in the Bronx at that time, negative attention. So I did my best to, make myself like invisible or as visible as I possibly could. And it made me sad. And I was lucky enough to find a place called Kips Bay Boys and Girls Club. It's part of the Boys and Girls Clubs. But that, club has, I don't want to say it's famous, but, it's the same Boys and Girls Club that Jennifer Lopez went to, that Kerry Washington went to. And they had a performing arts program. And, I got involved in that. And it was a saving grace in my life because it was a place where I was accepted. And I found, art, I found, performing, and I found, a community, and it was liberating. And even if I felt like I couldn't be myself in life, I could be myself on stage, and, that was invaluable. So, I started there, and lucky enough, I was good at it, and it kept going. I continued acting in high school, through college. I decided to audition at NYU on a whim. It was just like, oh, I heard about it like on the Cosby Show because Theo went there, and it was like, well, let me try it out, and I auditioned. And I got in, and through the grace of God, I got into this program called the Higher Education Opportunity Program, which is for like economically disadvantaged people who have potential. I can't remember exactly, but it was basically for, poor kids who think that they have a shot in this program. And I got in, and I did it, and I got out, and I began trying to navigate working in this crazy industry at a time when, there wasn't much opportunity. We have recently been coming through what people call like the golden age of television, where there's so many different stories being told. And, at the time when I graduated, there really wasn't that, wealth of opportunity. we had like Law and Order and like the original Law and Order, and then a couple of the maybe like I think a couple years later like SVU. But a lot of the roles were stereotypical. And I was lucky enough to kind of carve out a lane for myself. Playing those bad guys and stuff like that. But it wasn't something that was necessarily reflective of the images that I wanted to put out into the world, images that, I could, be proud of. So I knew it was something that, although I loved acting, there was more that I wanted to do. And while I was at NYU, I discovered that I had a talent for teaching, specifically, and a gift, not only just a gift, but a passion for, working with young people. And, a lot of actors have side hustles, as they're starting to make their mark in the industry. Oftentimes you hear like waiters or retail. And for me, and I couldn't identify it. I wouldn't say it was a side hustle, but another passion of mine became, education and using my skills as an actor to work with young people. And that's actually how I discovered writing. I was a very talented actor, and I would work with these educational programs where playwrights would go into high schools and teach playwriting to young people. And I would get hired to act out the scenes that were written by the young people. And because I was a good actor, I would get asked to do this a lot but for different playwrights. So I would observe playwrights teaching playwriting to young people. And that's actually how I learned how to write. Eventually, I ended up being a director for a theater company that did HIV prevention through theater, and not just HIV, just theater around social issues. And I began writing for the company. And, in writing for the company, that's where I, one, discovered my voice as a writer, two, realized the power that, writing and creating can have, on young people, on humanity, on moving the needle forward. I recognize the fact that, marginalized people from marginalized communities, or aren't being seen enough. This was before people were talking about representation matters. A lot of the work we were doing was catching fire, and people would love it because they had never seen anything like it before. So for a while, writing became kind of my secret thing, like my source of solitude. And one of the pieces that we wrote for the company that I wrote for the company, was about a kid who, at his prom, decides to come out to his crush, or is struggling to come out to his crush at prom. And it was a piece that got a lot of attention, that people loved. And everyone would be like, one day, if you ever get that chance, you got to turn this into a movie. It's so good. It got to be a movie. And then eventually I heard about this competition that HBO was doing, and you had to be able to tell story in under 10 minutes. And by that point, this play was longer, but I edited and created the film version, the short film version of this, and I entered the competition. And I won, and HBO gave me $15,000, and I believe it was like 19 days, and we had to produce it, shoot it, edit it, and then it would make its premiere at the New York Latino Film Festival. And then HBO would have the option to pick it up. So all of those things happened, and within 3 months, I had a short film on HBO, and that was playing all over. And it was one of those things where I realized, wow, one, this is cool, and look how things can change. But also, this was something that I wanted to do, and I really got to see a taste of what it was like to put something out into the universe, and for it to catch fire, and for it to resonate with people. And that was my first time doing that as a creator. I've had that opportunity as an actor, but that was kind of like the impetus for, you know, me growing the other side, where I wasn't just an actor, and now I was a writer and I was a creator. And I was really glad that I gave myself the opportunity to do that.
There's a couple of interesting points throughout the whole story that you were sharing with us, and that's at what point in life was this? Around what years?
Oh my God! I just gave you like from 2000 to 2011 in a nutshell.
Well, so that's good, because I wanted to touch on 2011. I remember there was an interview where you spoke that 2011 was a very interesting year for you. Why?
It was a transformative year. For so many reasons. So I mean, just tracking. You know, I just gave you like the fast forward, you know, kind of version of that career. So I started working at El Puente in 2000, I believe. That's when I graduated from college. You know, and in that time, like I was doing the rounds of auditions and slowly starting to work and like going to LA and like, you know, doing plays here and there and like just really building my career. You know, I had a lead in like this big indie movie at the time, and like, you know, my career was as an actor was, you know, just starting to take shape. In 2005, February of 2005, I became HIV positive. And that was right around the time where like, you know, my career was just starting to elevate, and like, yeah, I'd just done a lead in a movie that went to Toronto Film Festival. So I had all of this amazing stuff that was happening. And then, you know, at the time when I was diagnosed as HIV positive, it felt like, you know, just like a huge smack in the face. And, you know, that, you know, 18 years ago now, you know, it wasn't, and not to say that, you know, we are all of up, because there's so many misconceptions about HIV and even in 2023. But at that time in particular, you know, there was a lot of stigma. And we were, you know, it felt massive. It felt like, you know, everything that I was working towards at that time, I believed in my head, felt like was being flushed down the toilet. And I internalized just a lot of shame around it. And for a big chunk of my life, you know, I felt, well, one, I didn't really talk about it with the exception of a select few people. In 2008, I ended up getting cast on the reboot of The Electric Company, which I know you're a fan of. And that was a great time in my life, but it was one of those things where like this amazing thing was happening, but I had this other thing happening underneath that I really couldn't talk about, that I felt like, you know, I wasn't in therapy. I wasn't taking care of myself. And, you know, for a long time, that's how I lived. And in 2011, which thank you for doing the research on, in 2011, I had a moment in my life where I had a suicidal thought. I didn't, you know, try to commit suicide. It wasn't an active thing, but I know for me, having the thought was enough. And it was in that moment, I literally I was living alone at the time. And I took a cab to my parents' house and slept on the floor for the weekend because I didn't want to be alone. And then that Monday I started therapy. And in that time, I had just gotten cast in a movie called Musical Chairs. And it was about a guy who falls in love with this woman who's a dancer. And she ends up in a car accident where she is now using a chair. And in her rehabilitation process, it's kind of cheesy. He starts teaching wheelchair ballroom dancing at the love interest at the facility that she's doing, and you know, they prep for a wheelchair ballroom dance competition. All right, this sounds cheesy, but it was a great movie. Laverne Cox is in it, Priscilla Lopez, EJ Bonilla. And I remember while we were shooting it, there's a big dance sequence at the end. It was gorgeous. And I don't know if you are familiar with wheelchair ballroom dancing, but there is there's one able-bodied partner, and then there's one person with a chair, and you're partnering up, and it's really, really gorgeous and beautiful. But I remember, one, it was a predominantly Latinx crew, a very, Latinx ensemble, and a lot of the performers were also in chairs or used chairs. And it was one of those things where, for me, it was a little bit of an awakening, because I saw the resilience. I saw, some of them, my castmates who used chairs, had these incredible battles of having to learn how to, navigate life with this new situation. And I remember that being a metaphor for me in terms of my situation. And I started therapy. I was doing this movie, and the movie was very therapeutic for me. And, that was all 2011. And then around the time of my birthday that year, which was 6 years after my diagnosis, I told my mom for the first time. And that was a big step in my healing. That was 2011. And I always say that was the beginning of my journey, because that ended up leading to a bunch of other things. It's never kind of one thing that causes anything. It's just all this stuff from when you're past. The kid you didn't take care of, the inner child, the 10, makes choices that affect you when you're 20 and 25. And just me, that was the beginning of me beginning the work.
Throughout that moment, you mentioned a lot of being HIV positive, having suicidal thoughts, the mental issues that were going on. Throughout all of that, you were doing all these things that a lot of people didn't know that you were going through. And so to me, that's a very crazy.
Yeah.
Because you had to act like nothing was going on, but internally there was a lot.
And there always is with people. And that's one of those things, you never really know what someone's going through. I was acting, for, a period of that time, during that time from 2008 to 2010 or 11, we were shooting, the Electric Company, and, it was a kid's show, and I had to put on a face, and, do the publicity and stuff. And I was putting on a face at home, and there's only so much acting that you can do. You can do it in your professional life, but if you're doing it at home, or, constantly, it affects you, and it wears on you, and you can't do it anymore. And for me, it was something that, or you can do it and then deal with the repercussions. And oftentimes those repercussions are not healthy. And for me, I wanted to take ownership of my life. I wanted to be healthy. I recognized the fact that I didn't like where I was emotionally and mentally and spiritually, and I needed to change that. And in order to change, it requires action. And that action for me was therapy, was, grounding myself and, giving myself a spiritual core, physical. I had a huge weight loss transformation in 2014 that was part of that. And the weight loss came after I did a lot of the interior work in therapy and a lot of the spiritual work that I needed. So I always say that the weight loss was a outward manifestation of all the work that I had already been doing for the past 3 years. But yeah, I, like most people, are really good at masking, and I didn't want to anymore. And I don't really, I am someone who is really transparent, sometimes too transparent. but I pride myself on that because I know that, not often do people feel comfortable enough, being this vulnerable, being, this forthcoming with challenges that they've overcome. But I think the operative word is overcome, and I think, I am someone who is very resilient, is very strong, is very powerful. And I feel like, in sharing my story, I know that it provides inspirations for others. And I'm grateful that I am in a position where I can do that. And I think everyone can, if they're vulnerable, if they're brave enough. And I think for me, I had spent such a long time, choosing fear, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And for, one of the things that I've come to know is that when you work through fear, when you push past fear, that's where the magic happens. That's where abundance begins to flow. That's where, you get opportunities that you never even would have dreamed of. Yeah. And that's a really exciting place to be and to point to live life from.
This is a very tough question for me to ask, and you can choose to skip it. But the moment when you described having a suicidal thought, why not choose to go through with it? And what was going around your parents and your family's perspective?
Well, it was actually very easy. One, it was a thought. And I can literally say it was a thought. It came and it went. And in me recognizing the thought, I recognize that that's not me. And when I say that's not me, that's not the core of who I am. And in that moment, I made a decision that although I had that feeling, that feeling isn't reflective of who I am. And for me, I just recognized it for what it was. It was a sign for me to get help, that I needed help, that I couldn't do this on my own. So that's when I, chose to find the right team to help me. When it came to my parents, I didn't tell them then. It took another 6 months for me to tell my mom. And I never disclosed to my father. My father died a couple of years later. And my relationship with my father was different from my relationship with my mother. And, when it comes to disclosure, you tell whoever you want to tell. You share whatever you want to share. And for me, it was more important for my mom to know, just because that's my mom. And I wanted to share that aspect of my life with her. And when I did, I write about it in, there's a podcast. I wrote an episode of this queer Latinx podcast called Love and Gravity. My episode is called Our Lady of the Sixth Train. And it's amazing. You should go listen to it. Robin De Jesus, my best friend, 3-time Tony nominee and star of Tick Tick Boom and Camp and a bunch of other shit. He's in it. Anna Ortiz did the live version, but Jessica Marie Garcia from On My Block, Jason Janelle from On My Block, they're both in it. It's amazing, amazing cast. But there's a scene about where the character discloses his HIV status to his mom after a while, after many years. And, one of the things that my mom said, she was just like, I am so sorry. I can't believe. She apologized for me feeling that I couldn't tell her. Like, what did that mean for her as a mom? And she was like, I'm your mother. You should be able to tell me anything. And I remember in that moment, it was, she was crying, and it was devastating for me because I realized that not only did I deprive her, I deprived myself of something. I deprived myself of support, and I held that in. And my mom, when I did tell her, she was so she was so supportive, and I just, I was doing my best. And I think that was one of the lessons that I learned in therapy, is that, people are, always try to live life from a point of view that everyone is doing their best. Now that looks different on everybody. But in that time, I was doing my best with my experience. My growing up, I never felt, because I felt like so much of an outsider. I had issues with trusting people, even family. And I think that had a lot to do with my decision, not to disclose sooner. But things happen when they're supposed to happen, the way that they need to happen, I believe. And I think it was in divine alignment. There's a reason why I say 2011 was a transformative year, because all of those kind of steps just happened one by one. And they all helped each other and helped me in my journey.
What happened after 2011? You mentioned the weight loss. I really want to touch on the film Skin that you made.
So after 2011, it was just like I gave myself the ability to fly. It was doing the work. I was in therapy. I was like doing everything and like really digging deep. I did like a religion parade where I was like, discovering different religions, and then finding a spiritual center that really spoke to me, and a way of thinking about God and the universe that really spoke to me. And in 2013, my father passed. In dealing with that, I realized that all the work that I was doing spiritually and mentally, because at that point I was, I think my highest weight was, I reached 387 pounds. And I knew that for the most part, I was doing well. Like I didn't have diabetes but I was getting older, and I knew that it was just a matter of time, in terms of, diabetes and heart conditions and all that stuff that runs in my family. I wanted to do as much as I can to prevent that. So almost exactly 9 years ago, on September 30th, 2014, I had gastric bypass surgery. And I lost a ton of weight. I lost almost 200 pounds. I lost 190 pounds from September 2014 to June 2015. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like 10 months. And I went from, always working as a larger actor to being unrecognizable. Like people who had known me for a long time in my career, I could walk by them on the street and they wouldn't notice me because I look so different. So, that affected kind of my career, because I essentially had to start from scratch. All these relationships, I didn't look like that. So I had to change people's like kind of perspective of me. And in that experience, I was having one day I was having a whiny actory day, talking to my manager, and she said, "Dominic, I don't feel sorry for you." She said, "You are an incredibly talented writer. You know a lot of people. Create something for yourself." And I took the challenge. It was something in the moment I didn't want to hear. I was like, "What's she saying?" But I was very grateful looking back on it, because I went and I created a short film about a guy who, after extreme weight loss, is scared to have sex without a shirt on, with his boyfriend without a shirt on. And I wrote this film, raised them. It was the complete opposite of Experience of Crush, where it was a very long process. I raised the money myself, kind of did everything independently. But, I remember being on set to shoot the movie, and everyone was getting paid because we, made sure that we paid our artists, even though it was, not a lot of money. But I remember being on set and seeing everyone there, and just knowing that it was because I had the bravery to put this story, on paper. And now we're going to create this thing that will now affect people's lives. And even though the story was very specific to my experience, the universality behind it is the fact that everyone knows what it's like to be insecure about something, to be afraid, so that fear hold them back. And I think that was one of the beautiful things about the movie. And the movie, I chose, it's the most vulnerable I've ever been in the sense that, there is a nude scene, a nude love scene, and you get to see a whole lot of me. But the story behind that was, it was something that I needed to do to kind of free myself. And in that, I discovered, wow, this is what I want the next career, part of my career, the trajectory of my career to be. And that's when I really started taking writing seriously and really learning about the craft in a new way, specifically for TV and film. Because when Crush happened, I had all of this exciting stuff happening, like, people were calling, but I didn't have anything because it was the first thing I ever submitted for. I didn't have this arsenal of tools and scripts. I applied for one thing, I got it, and then all of a sudden I had all this tension and that I had nothing to kind of follow up with. But when this, eventually, after shooting Skin, I was able to build up that repertoire and work on a bunch of different stuff. And then right after the pandemic hit, one of my scripts ended up on being selected for the inaugural Latinx TV list, which was this list of the most, I forget exactly how they say it, but the best unproduced scripts from Latinx writers. And it's distributed through this organization called the Blacklist, which is a big deal in Hollywood. So being on that, I got the attention of all the fancy agents, and I ended up getting a deal to write something for Hulu, and eventually, long story short, getting staffed on my first writing for a show that was shooting up until the strike for Netflix. And yes, I've been spending the better part of the past 3 years writing and developing for television.
So I was writing a couple of things down because I really want to touch on these things. And me being a fan of your story, and not really knowing about everything that you went through, besides me just seeing you on television, it really puts a different perspective on how
because nobody
goes through life. And so the one thing that it is you mentioned freedom. You mentioned freedom after creating Skins, and because you felt free. I want you to touch a little bit more on that, but I also want you to touch on your thought process. Your mom told you that you should have told her sooner, that you should have believed in her, and you had somebody tell you that they don't feel bad for you. How do you see that? And then how do you see yourself after you were able to write your story?
So it was two. There were both two different situations that ended up making their way into my productions. When it came to my mom, my mom was just being a mom, and I think the fact that I didn't disclose to her sooner, she felt bad, and I get it. But in that moment, I was doing what I thought I had to do in order to, for my own safety. And yeah, it happened in the way that it needed to happen. When it came to Skin, my manager, that was, not that it was tough love, because I think it was what I needed to hear, because, oftentimes as actors, people spend time waiting to audition, waiting for someone to give them the opportunity. And in that moment, I was essentially waiting on people who, have known me for a significant amount of time, because I've, been, pretty consistent working actor, to give me the permission to act again. And what my manager told me was that I didn't need to wait for anybody. I had all the skills, and I was able to use those skills that I acquired over the years to, write and create something brand new that tested myself, that tested the walls of, me being comfortable. And because I was able to do that and come out on the other side as a better person and a braver creator, I think it set me up and gave me the confidence to know that this was something that I could do. Not only could I do it, I could do it well. And I didn't need the support from a corporation for that. And liberation came from that. And affirmation came from that. And I was really fortunate to have had someone who spoke up to me like that, and just reminded me that, you don't need anyone to come save you. You can save you.
This very important question that I always love asking, because I love getting the very honest answer to this and how it is your story is, what was happiness to you back then? What is happiness to you now?
Well, that is a good question. Back then, what do you mean back then? Like when specifically?
Like in your early years of your career, the earlier years of your childhood, what did be happiness to you at that moment?
I mean, so in the early years of my career, because that's what just came to me first, I remember just being so excited for any little job. Like if it was like I think my first TV experience was on like Law and Order SVU, and it was a couple like I discovered a dead body in the teaser, which is the opening of the episode. And I was so excited because it was like my first time, like SVU. It had been out a couple of years, so it was super exciting. And like I invited friends to come over and watch, and that was like a big deal because it was just like, oh wow, like you did this. And I think that was the thing, is the fact that oftentimes you go through life thinking that being an actor, that's not for us. That's, for those people over there. But whether or not we can actually do it and end up and perform and, be on TV and be a working actor, that I remember, booking those jobs in the beginning, like just, it didn't matter what it was. It was just such a sense of joy. And I often, talk about just, allowing yourself to create when you create, to create from joy, and like not focus on whatever other hardships that can come from this industry. So always just take a moment and just remember your intention, remember your purpose, and remember that like this can be fun, and it should be fun, and creating from that place makes all the funky times that we have to go through in this industry less funky.
Knowing something now, and this can be in anything, in life, in your career, in anything really, what is something now that you wish you would have known when you were younger or when you first started in your career? Something that you can go back and tell yourself something.
Fear is always going to be there. And you have control over how you show up to it, and you have control over how loud that fear is. Your job is to turn that volume down and to work through it and work past it. Like, I would tell myself how strong I am. I would tell myself how worthy I am. And this is something that like I affirm every day. It's really easy to kind of think, the opposite way, to believe in self-limiting beliefs or etc. Because the world teaches us that. The world constantly affirms that. So we have to unlearn that and, relearn that we are worthy, that we are enough, that every space we step into, we are worthy of being, that we're smart, that we're talented, that we have shit to say, important shit to say. And that it is our duty to show up as our full selves. I remember that was one of my affirmations whenever I would press the Zoom link for the writer's room that I worked on, because it was a virtual room, and I was the only Latino working on the show, and I was one of two people of color And I remember just being very intentional with how I show up in the room, because although it was just me, I was representing the story of so many other people like me. And I knew that I wasn't showing up just as Dominic. I was showing up, you know, for the members of the communities that I stand for. And I realized very early that this was bigger than me. So I didn't have the luxury of holding back. I didn't have the luxury of keeping my mouth shut. I always had to speak up. I always had to speak out. I always had to fight for what I want, in terms of story, because I'm very passionate about, the show and the stories that we're telling in these characters, because, they are extensions of me and, the story of people who I love. And, and I always say, I'm married. Whenever I work on a project, I'm married to the story, So it's always making sure that whatever story we're telling, we tell it from a place of truth and authenticity. And we tell it in the best way we can, because those are, people who have lived that, and that's our duty. Yeah.
You mentioned the most interesting thing, and it's being a Latino. I live in the border of Mexico, West Texas, and being a Latino, I think it's something very important that we really need to talk about. You were in the biggest companies in the industry as a Latino. Run me through that process. Run me through.
I was in the what? I'm sorry. You said I was in the.
You were.
I was in the what?
Companies. Some of the biggest companies in the industry.
Oh, thank you. It's one of those things where sometimes you don't recognize what you did. Like, there's times I'm like, oh wow, okay, I did do this. I always say this. I represent a lot of stuff. As a gay person, as a Latina person, as a person from the Bronx. But I always say, like, it's funny because I always say I step into the room, as a Latino first, because that's basically. But then I was like, I actually think you step into the room as somebody from the Bronx first. I was like, and then it's like Latino as an offset of it. But no, I was born here. My parents were born in Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I love my heritage. I love being Latino. I love being New Rican, and it's something that I lead with everywhere I go. And I think one of the reasons why I'm so why I am passionate about always being that and always repping it and always, being authentic to my experience is the fact that, like, when I was in college, I felt shame for it because, I was in acting school, and it feels like, at the time, I don't know how it is now, but it felt like they wanted to strip you of your identity. Everything that made you, that made you unique. And, I think that is a bit of a mind fuck, especially, if you are another, or when I say other, I mean non-white in a predominantly white institution. And then you add coming from poverty as well. It was incredibly alienating. So, it felt like I wasn't good enough. And it felt like I was, no matter how hard I try. I mean, I did well in school, but it felt like me, Dominic, wasn't good. Or me, there was this thing that I wasn't like them. And when I got out of there, I didn't realize, psychologically what that did to me. And I was like, I don't ever want to let that happen again. So I make it my business to show up as my full self, to create work that tells the story of people like me, and highlights and hire people who look like me, so that there are more faces, so that other people can realize that we can do this, and, that we have a wealth of, stories to tell. my experience, as a New Yorican person is different from your experience, and even though we are both, Latino, Latina, Latinx, whatever you want to call it, our stories are unique, and we all have we all have to make sure that we take care of each other and we get these stories heard. And there's universality to our stories, even though they're completely they're different. And it's incredibly exciting to be able to do this and to speak from my perspective. And it's something that I don't take lightly. It's something that, I wear it on my chest, and I lead with it. And I think that's one of the things that make me special.
Was it tough? I think I'm really trying to get into how hard was it to progress, I guess, in the industry being Latino? Because a lot of times we don't get opportunity. A lot of times we're looked down at. Was it really tough?
I think for me, I fought. That's tough. And it's always going to be tough. And I think one of the things for me is that I didn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? It was going to be tough. And I think that's one of the things that I got from coming of age when I did, from coming from the Bronx when I did, from having that child that I had, that I was used to fighting, that I was used to having to fucking make a way. The fact that I was able to go to NYU, being as fucking broke as I was, coming from where I come from, I was not a 90 average. I was barely a 75 student, you know what I'm saying? And it was just one of those things where however it happened, and I had to take advantage of it. And even when I was dealing with fucking racist white teachers, I still had to fucking kill it. And I still had to fucking, get my A's, my A minuses, and do what I had to do. And it was one of those things where it was tough, but I knew what I was fighting for, and I kept my eyes on the prize. And that is what led me through. And I think, it's so, when you have that fight and you have that fight married with the faith, because no matter what, no matter how bad things were, I always had this faith that things were going to be great and things were going to work out and things will always work out. And I still believe that to this day. And it's beautiful, being in this, living as long as I have and being in this industry, but also just being a soul on this earth when, you get to witness, people's journeys. I remember, Liza Colon Zayas, who, she's on the Bear now. I remember her watching her perform 25 years ago and just being in awe of what a phenomenal actor she was, and just being blown away and just doing anything that I could, I would iron her clothes, before, she had a solo show and I was interning at that theater. It was one of those things where it was just I wanted to be around the brilliance, and to see that brilliance, finally other people getting to know how brilliant she is after 25 years is just an incredible blessing. To see people grow, to watch people shine, to see people get their due, and to be able to rise as a collective. It's just, I'm grateful that for my life's path. I'm grateful for all of it, even those kind of weird moments and those moments that felt like they were the end of something, which they weren't. And I didn't have the perspective on it that I do now. But, all of those moments that the past 40 years of my life have have led me to becoming the man that I am today. And I love the person who I am today. I love him a lot, and I think he's really fucking cool. And I am who I am as a result of those experiences. So I can't take away those experiences. Those experiences made me who I am. So I'm grateful for that. You might not be able to see it at the time when you're dealing with racist, teachers at NYU. But even those moments taught me lessons.
So the last thing I want to talk about, these last two questions are, one is the strike that is currently going on. And I want you to talk about it, address it from the things that you've been seeing, stuff like that. I really want you to talk about it and speak about it.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a very like long, complicated conversation. I'll do my best to kind of, simplify it as much we can. How people watch television has changed significantly over, the past 10 years with the way streaming has kind of blown up. While streaming has created what seems to be like more opportunity in a way for actors because there's more shows, I think. I think what the model that is being used now is not financially sustainable. Back when I was growing up, they would air shows from like September to April, and then all of the summer, like those shows would repeat, and you would get paid residuals for those for having your work, being able to be able to rewatch your work. And those shows would get sold, and like at some point you would get a check, and actors and writers were able to survive. That was a means of income. With streaming and the lack of transparency around streaming, all of that has gone out of the window. Rates, because this was considered new media at the time, that was what they called it. The pay rates were significantly smaller. So I like to use Orange is the New Black as an example because they were kind of the guinea pigs. But a lot of those performers on Orange were not series regulars. They were paid as guest stars, oftentimes a one-day guest star, where you would get paid like $900, for the day, which sounds like a lot, but $900 for the day when you're being taxed at 30% and you have to give 10% to your agent, 10% to your manager, and they shoot all your stuff, and you did all episodes of those of the season, so it feels like you're a series regular, but you made $900, and like everyone thinks you're like famous because you're on TV, when the reality is you still have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to pay your rent. And 10 years later, they still have access, to those shows. You can pull up that show right now, and none of those women, none of those performers on that show get residual income. And that's a huge part of one of the reasons why we're striking in terms of the pay inequity is insane, because we don't have residuals. Contracts are ridiculously low, and the corporations are making billions upon billions of dollars because of this. So that's like a big, one of the many reasons that we're doing it. The other reason is regulating AI and the use of AI, because again, these corporations are all about making money, and they are trying to cut costs in any way they can. One of the proposals was basically to, screen background actors' faces and then have use of their image in perpetuity. Now, there are people who can make 6 figures a year, who provide, for their family, who pay their mortgage through being a background actor, and they just want to eliminate that option because so it will save, make rich people even more rich. That's insane to me. They've had people been quoted in Deadline, which is like the Hollywood trades, is like, oh, we're gonna starve them out until they begin to lose their homes and apartments. And it's like, that's the greed that we're up against. Like, their strategy is make them homeless, which is insane to me and inhumane to me. And the fact that, we're talking about writers and actors and, people who literally give so much of themselves to entertain and to share. And like, the fact that, not only are we not being compensated, but we're not, like, the work that we're doing is not being appreciated and it's just completely disregarded. And like, when you think about, the early days of, not even the early days, like during those rough months of the pandemic, like, what were people doing? Watching TV, And those moments were made bearable because of actors and writers and creators. And we deserve to have we deserve to benefit from the work that we're doing. And not only benefit, like, just for it to be fair, like, to have equity in it. So that has been, over the past 4 months, that's been a huge fight. We're still fighting for a fair and equitable contract, and we hope it'll end soon. Right now, there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, and we still continue to walk the lines and fight, and we'll continue to do it until we get a fair and equal contract.
I really do hope there's really do, because it really changes you also as like enjoying a TV show differently now, because now you know the stories in the background of what goes on behind the curtain, and so it's like you don't really enjoy it anymore.
Yeah, especially when it comes to especially when it comes to streaming. Like, I mean, streaming is broken. That model is broken. And rather than try to fix it, they just want to continue to exploit it even further, which is where the whole AI thing. Yeah. So we this is not, and this isn't hyperbole. This is the fight for the future of the industry. It literally is. We'll never have this moment again, which is why we're fighting, and why, 4 months into it, we're still on strike.
There's a closing tradition that we have here, and it's where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who it is. And so the question that they left for you, and I think this is a really interesting question because it fits into just having everything come into a close, is the last guest asked if you think that the people around you are the problem or the solution.
I think the people around me are the solution. I'm very selective with who I let into my life, with the energy I bring into my life. I love to say I have lots of like-minded, just beautiful, beautiful souls who are in life with me. Like, I'm very fortunate to have had friends that I've known for like the better part of 30 years. So it's one of those things I always say, if I fuck with you, I fuck with you. And like, I'm very grateful to just have such amazing people in my life that who are about it, and who are about making change and creating pathways, and not only holding doors open, but leaving them open, and pushing people through. And I'm part of that. And I only kind of associate with people like that. So yeah, definitely part of the solution.
Very grateful.
This is great. I mean, I thought you were going to just hit me with a whole bunch of electric company questions. So I'm really...
no, I mean, as much as I wanted to.
Wait, what?
No, but that is really crazy. I mean, you opened me up to really... I realize it a lot of the times now when I'm doing these interviews, I'm doing the podcast, is that there is so much that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see. Like on social media, they see you happy, they see you partying, they see you in the best moments of your life, but they don't know the true things that happen. And so it's like, to me, that's the reason for this podcast, is share these stories. So it's
really... what's interesting is that I just made the connection too. Like, even with the electric company, I had to kind of bring it back, but like, we did 50 episodes. We don't get paid. I don't see an electric company check rolling up in my... Yeah, it's wild. And it's just like, you can still watch it. You can go to Hulu right now and like pull it up. And it's just the reality that, that's a thing.
The only thing I get from the electric company is the electric bill.
I know. But being on strike, sometimes you gotta let it linger on a little bit, because crazy times. But all this too will pass, like my mom said, and like, we're gonna come out of this stronger. I know that with absolute certainty. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think the industry is really, really going to change. Dominic, I'm gonna let you go, but I really, really appreciate it. I'm super grateful to have you on here and get to meet you, and hopefully we stay in touch.
Oh, no, thank you, Isaac. This is my pleasure. Yeah, this is my pleasure. So thank you all for having me and for making this happen. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully one day, we'll talk more. This is part one, maybe.
Absolutely. No. Well, I'm actually doing this documentary on a luchador. I don't know if you ever watched WWE Sin Cara. Have you ever seen him?
Yeah, well, I'm so excited for that movie that's coming out, Cassandra. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. Oh my God. So he's from Juarez here in El Paso. Yeah.
Really? Wow. Oh, yeah, that's insane. I can't wait. Awesome. I work with the New York Latino Film Festival, and we are gonna do the New York premiere of that movie.
That is awesome. That is really awesome.
I'm super excited. Yeah, I'm super excited. Yeah. Well, no, it makes sense. You're doing a documentary on that?
Yeah, so it's a documentary about his life and him kind of going into the industry. Same kind of thing, but they were very racist towards him as a WWE wrestler, and they didn't give him opportunities because he was Latino. And so it's talking about those stories and things like that. So hopefully by December we'll finish it. I'll send you the trailer for it so that you can look at it. We have a smaller trailer.
Please, yeah. And it's a documentary or a documentary feature.
It's gonna be a feature. We were thinking of 45 minutes or more just to go into like the film festivals for like those Oscars and stuff like that,
Yeah. Do it. This is exciting. I can't wait to see it.
Definitely, Sauce. I'll keep you in touch on that, man. Thank you.
Congratulations.